Welcome to the botany class, and today's uh, topic is ecosystems, and we will start the ecology. And today's lecture is about the introduction to ecology. So ecology is the study of how living organisms and the physical environment interact in an immense and intricate web of relationship. The first concept of ecology was developed in the 19th century by Haeckel, by Ernst Haeckel, and uh, he created its name echo from the Greek house and logi from the Greek study. So ecology literally means the study of the house. So uh, that can be the human house, that can be your own house, that can be animal house or the house for the plants, etc. Biologists call environmental factors involving living organisms biotic factors, and those involving the non-living physical environment abiotic factors. Abiotic factors include precipitation, temperature, pH, wind, and chemical nutrients. Ecologists develop hypotheses to explain such phenomena as the distribution and abundance of life, the ecological role of specific species, and the interactions among species. Ecologists then test these hypotheses. The focus of ecology is local or global, specific or generalized, depending on what questions the scientist is trying to answer. Thus, one ecologist might study the organisms living in the rotting log like this. Another ecologist might study all the organisms that live in a forest where the rotting log is found, and another might examine how matter cycles between the forest and surrounding communities. And there are some ecologists that uh, study the universe, like the Earth, the space, the Milky Way. So, and depending on how much they study, they have a different position. So, like usually, the larger is the uh, uh, the scope of the ecology they study, the higher is their position. So some ecologists, they might even be politicians, and they can be they can uh, make the bills, and then uh, to uh, to they can find the companies, kill the companies, the global companies, and then uh, that is why the impact of the ecology is very, very high. So the focus of ecology is local or global, scientific or generalized. So how does ecology fit into the organization of the biological world? Most ecologists are interested in the levels of biological organization, including and above the level of the individual organism. Individual organisms are arranged into populations, members of the same species that live in a prescribed area at the same time. For example, population of students, like they that live in a dormitory in the students' hostel, So uh, individuals have boundaries of the area are defined by ecologists performing a particular study. A population ecologist, for example, might study a population of pines or a population of cord grass, like that discussed uh, uh, before. Populations are organized into communities, which are all the populations of different organisms that live and interact within the area. For example, besides the students, we have the professors, we have the technicians, then we have the janitory, and then the security, and all they are at the university. So this is a community. Community ecologists might study how organisms interact with one another, including who eats whom, and in a deciduous forest community or in an alpine meadow community. So, for example, when you arrive at the university, you are required to wear the second shoes because the janitors will not be uh, uh, happy if you don't change your shoes at the entrance. So because you bring more uh, dirty, and then they have to clean it more. So that is why they check if you bring a second shoes. So this is the interaction between students and the janitors. So then the ecosystem, a more inclusive term than community, and it encompasses a community and its environment. Thus, an ecosystem includes not only all the interactions among the organisms of a community, but the interactions between organisms and their physical environment. An ecosystem ecologist, for example, might examine how energy and materials move through the organisms living in a salt marsh community and a rainforest community. Earth's ecosystems are organized into the biosphere, which includes all the Earth's organisms. In addition to the biosphere, there are divisions of Earth's physical environment on which the biosphere depends: the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and lithosphere. The atmosphere is the gaseous envelope surrounding Earth. The hydrosphere is Earth's supply of water, liquid and frozen, fresh and salty. And the lithosphere is the soil and rock of Earth's crust. Ecologists who study the biosphere examine the interrelationships among Earth's atmosphere, land, water, and organisms. Ecology, the broadest field within the biological sciences, has links to every other biological discipline and to other disciplines: geology, chemistry, the earth science, for example, that are not traditionally part of biology. Because humans are biological organisms, all human activities, including economic and politics, have profound ecological implications. That is why many ecologists now become politicians, and they sit in the take places in the political campaigns, so political sphere, and so that is why it's very uh, hard work to be an ecologist now. Population ecology considers both a number of individuals of a particular species that are found in an area and the dynamics or changes in populations, how and why populations members increase or decrease over time. Population ecologists try to determine the process common to all populations. They study how predation, disease, and other environmental pressures affect a population. They also examine how a population interacts with its environment, such as how individuals in a population compete for sunlight or other resources, and because of competition, predation, and other environmental pressures, population growth, whether of bacteria, algs, or humans, does not increase indefinitely. Additional aspects of populations that interest ecologists are the reproductive success or failure or extinction, their evolution, their genetics, and the way they affect the normal functioning of communities and ecosystems. Biologists in applied disciplines such as forestry and agronomy, that is crop science, must understand population ecology to manage populations of economic importance. Also, understanding the population dynamics of endangered and threatened species plays a key role in effort to prevent their slide to extinction. Like other organisms, the individuals in a plant population often exhibit characteristic patterns of spacing or dispersion relative to one another. Individuals may be spaced in a random, clumped, or uniform dispersion. Random dispersion occurs when the so this is a random dispersion, and it occurs when individuals in a population are spaced throughout an area in a way unrelated to the presence of others. So it's totally random, and so this is a random dispersion. Random dispersion is the least common and hardest to observe in nature, leading some ecologists to question its existence. Trees of the same species sometimes seem to be distributed randomly in a tropical rainforest, but in an extensive study of thousands of species, ecologists determined that most were not randomly dispersed. Perhaps the most common spacing is clumped dispersion, that is shown here, or patchiness, which occurs when individuals are concentrated in specific parts of the habitat. Clumped dispersion often results from the patchy distribution of resources in the environment. Clumped dispersion may also occur in plants because of limited seed dispersal or asexual reproduction. An entire grove of aspen trees, for example, may be clumped together because they originate asexually from a single plant. And the last one is uniform dispersion, occurs when individuals are more evenly spaced than would be expected from a random occupation of a given habitat. Uniform dispersion may occur when competition among individuals is severe, or when plant roots or abscissed leaves produce toxic substances that inhibit the growth of nearby plants. Population size, whether of sunflowers or redwoods, changes over time. The maximum rate at which a population increases per unit time under ideal conditions, that is, when resources are abundant, is known as its intrinsic rate of increase. Different species have different intrinsic rates of increase depending on such factors as their age, at which reproduction begins, the number of reproductive periods per lifetime, and the number of offspring the individual is capable of producing. These factors determine whether a particular species has a large or small intrinsic rate of increase. If we plot the population size versus time under optimal conditions, the graph has a J shape that is characteristic of exponential population growth. So this is a J shape. The accelerating population growth rate that occurs with optimal conditions allow a constant growth rate. When a population grows exponentially, the larger the population gets, the faster it grows. So this is a growth of bacteria. So actually they can divide very fast. Like some bacteria, for example, Escherichia coli divides every or every 4 seconds, I think. So every 10 seconds they double their the amount every 10 seconds. So regardless of which species we are considering, plant or animal, whenever a population is growing at its intrinsic rate of increase, population size plotted versus time always gives a curve of the same shape. So it is J shape. Certain populations may grow exponentially for brief periods. However, organisms cannot reproduce indefinitely at their intrinsic rate of increase because the environment sets limits. These limits include such unfavorable environmental conditions as limited availability of sunlight, water, and other essential resources, resulting in increased competition, as well as limits imposed by disease and predators. Over long periods, the rate of population growth may decrease to nearly zero, thus leveling out occurs at or near the limits of the environment to support the population. The carrying capacity represents the largest population that can be maintained for an indefinite period in a particular environment, assuming there are no changes in the environment. In nature, the carrying capacity is dynamic and changes in response to environmental changes. An extended drought, for example, could lower the carrying capacity for plants in that environment. When a population regulated by environmental limits is graphed over long periods, the curve has a characteristic S shape, and the curve shows the population's initial exponential increase followed by a leveling out. The carrying capacity is approached. The S-shaped growth curve, also called logistic population growth, describes a population increasing from a small number of individuals to a larger number of individuals in which population growth is ultimately limited by the environment. Although the S-curve is an oversimplification of how most populations change over time, it does fit some populations studied in the laboratory as well as the few studied in nature. Each species is uniquely suited to its life history, its lifetime patterns of growth and reproduction. Many years pass before a young magnolia tree flowers and produces seeds, whereas a poppy plant grows from seed, flowers, and dies in a single season. Plant ecologists try to understand the adaptive consequences of various life history traits. Characteristics such as reproductive patterns, potential capacity to produce offspring, lifespan, and survivorship. Some species expend their energy in a single, immense reproductive effort. Agaves, for example, are commonly called century plants because it was thought that they flower only once a century. However, an agave flower after it is about 10 years old and then dies. Other plants, species such as perennial herbaceous plants, shrubs, and trees, do not flower once and then die. Instead, these plants inhibit repeated reproductive cycles. Pines, for example, produce male and female cones every spring once the tree reaches a certain size. Survivorship, the probability that a given individual in a population will survive to a particular age, is another life history trait that ecologists study. A survivorship cue is produced by plotting the logarithm of the number of surviving individuals against age from seed germination in plants or birth in animals to the maximum age reached by any individual. And there are three main survivorship cues that ecologists recognize. The type 1 survivorship is exemplified by humans. The young and those at reproductive age have a high probability of surviving. The probability of surviving decreases more rapidly with increasing age. Mortality, death, is concentrated later in life. So most old people die more frequently than young people. And the type 3 survivorship, the probability of mortality is greatest early in life, and those individuals that avoid early death subsequently have a high probability of survival. Type 3 survivorship is characteristic of many tree species because many newly germinated seedlings die. Those trees that become established in the canopy exhibit low mortality for many years, unless they are used unless they are used by the human to make a furniture or to make a fire, so they usually survive very well. And then type 2 survivorship, which is intermediate between types 1 and 3. The probability of surviving does not change with age. The probability of death is equally likely across all age groups, resulting in a linear decline in survivorship. Annual plant populations crowded in a limited amount of space often exhibit type 2 survivorship. As those plants compete for individual sunlight, water, and other resources, individuals die at a more or less constant rate before they reproduce. Many plants uh, exist as metapopulations. The natural environment is a heterogeneous landscape consisting of interlacing ecosystems that produce a variety of habitat patches. Landscapes which are typical or uh, several to many square kilometers in area cover larger land areas than individual ecosystems. Consider a forest, for example. The forest landscape is a mosaic of various elevations, temperatures, levels of precipitation, soil moisture, soil type, and other properties. Because each species has its own habitat requirements, this heterogeneity in physical properties is reflected in the different organisms that occupy the various patches in the landscape. Some species occur in narrow habitat ranges, whereas others have wider habitat ranges. Uh, so populations ecologists have discovered that many species are not distributed as one large population across the landscape. Instead, many species exist as a series of local populations distributed in distinct habitat patches. A population that is divided into several local populations among which individuals occasionally disperse is known as metapopulations. For example, note the various local populations of red oak on the mountain slope at this figure. So, uh, like, uh, so this is like an oak here, and here it, it has like red oak, this patch, and this patch, and this patch. The spatial distribution of a species occurs because different habitats vary in sustainability from unacceptable to preferred. The preferred sites are more productive habitats that increase the likelihood of survival and reproductive success for the individuals living there. Communities exhibit characteristic properties that population lacks. These properties, known collectively as community structure and community functioning, include the number and types of species present, the relative abundance of each species, the interactions among species, and community resilience to disturbances. Community ecology is the description and analysis of patterns and processes within the community. Findings common patterns and processes in a wide variety of communities, for example, a pond community, a pine forest community, and sagebrush desert community, helps ecologists understand community structure and functioning. Communities are exceedingly difficult to study because a large number of individuals of many species interact with one another and are independent in a variety of ways. Species compete with one another for food, water, living space, and other resources. Some organisms kill and eat other organisms. Some species form intimate associations with one another, whereas other species are only distantly connected. Certain species interact in positive ways in a process known as facilitation, which modifies and enhances the local environment for other species. For example, alpine plants in harsh mountain environments grow faster and reproduce more successfully when other plants are growing nearby. On revealing that many positive and negative, direct and indirect interactions of organisms living in a community is one of the goals of the community ecologies. So the communities contain producers, consumers, and decomposers. On the basis of how they obtain nourishment, each organism plays one of three main roles in community life: producer, consumer, or decomposer. Most communities contain representatives of all three groups, which interact extensively with one another. Sunlight is the source of energy that powers almost all life processes. Producers, also called autotrophs, perform photosynthesis, the biological process in which light energy is captured and transformed into the chemical energy of organic molecules such as carbohydrates, which are manufactured from carbon dioxide and water. By incorporating the organic molecules that they manufacture into their own cells, producers make their bodies or body parts potential food sources for other organisms. Plants are the most significant producers on land. In aquatic environments, algae and certain prokaryotes are important producers. Animals are consumers, that is, they are heterotrophs that use the tissues of other plant and animal organisms as a source of food, energy, and bodybuilding materials. Consumers that each produces are called primary consumers, which usually means that they are exclusively herbivorous, so they only eat plants, like vegetarian. Cattle and deer are examples of primary consumers. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers and include flesh-eating carnivores, which consume other animals exclusively. Lions and tigers are examples of carnivores. Other consumers, called omnivores, eat a variety of plant and animal organisms. Birds, pigs, and humans are examples of omnivores. Some consumers, called detritus feeders or detrivorous, ingest detritus, which is dead organic matter that includes animal carcasses, leaf litter, and fungus. Detritivores such as snails, crabs, clams, and worms are especially abundant in aquatic habitats, where they burrow in the bottom mark and consume the organic matter that collects there. Earthworms are terrestrial detritus feeders, as are termites, beetles, snails, and millipedes. Many consumers do not fit readily into a single category of herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, or detritivore. To some degree, these organisms modify their food preferences as the needs arises. For example, in the salt marsh community, marsh crabs are both predators and detritus feeders. Therefore, some organisms change their food preferences over their lifetimes. Uh, Tadpoles are primary consumers, but adult frogs are secondary consumers. Decomposers are microbial heterotrophs that break down organic materials and use their decomposition products as a source of energy. Decomposers, which complete the work of detritus feeders in consuming dead organisms and waste products, typically release simple inorganic molecules such as carbon dioxide and minerals that can then be reused by producers. Bacteria and fungi are important decomposers. For example, sugar metabolizing fungi are first to invade dead wood. They consume the wood's simple carbohydrates. When they exhaust those, other fungi, often aided by termites and bacteria, complete the decomposition of the wood by digesting cellulose, a complex carbohydrate that is the main constituent of wood. Natural communities contain a balanced representation of producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers and decomposers are necessary for the long-term survival of any community. Through photosynthesis, producers provide both food and oxygen for the rest of the community. Decomposers are also indispensable because without them, dead organisms and waste products would accumulate indefinitely. Without decomposers, essential elements such as potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus would remain permanently in dead organisms and organic compounds, and therefore would be unavailable for use by new generations of organisms. Consumers also play an important role in communities by maintaining a balance between products and decomposers. Early organism has its own ecological niche, or simply niche, which is its role within the structure of function of community. Although the concept of ecologically uh, niche has been used in ecology since early in the 20th century, Yale Ecology's Hutchinson first described in 1957 the multidimensional nature of the niche that is accepted today. A complete description of an organism's ecological niche involves all the dimensions and aspects of the physical, chemical, and biological factors that the organism requires to survive, to remain healthy, and to reproduce. Among other things, the niche includes the local environment in which an organism lives, its habitat. A niche also encompasses how an organism obtains nourishment, what organisms eat it, and what organisms it competes with, and how it interacts with and is influenced by the abiotic components and um, such as light, temperature, and moisture. Because a complete description of an organism's ecological niche involves many dimensions and is difficult to define precisely, ecologists usually confine their studies to one or a few niche variables such as ability to tolerate temperature extremes. Competition occurs when two or more individuals simultaneously require a single resource, which is usually its limited supply. The resources for which plants commonly compete include water, light, soil minerals, and growing space. Because resources are often in limited supply in the environment, their use by one individual decreases the amount available to others. If a tree in a dense forest grows taller than surrounding trees, for example, it absorbs more of the incoming sunlight. Less sunlight is therefore available for nearby trees shaded by the taller tree. Competition occurs among individuals within a population or between species. Competition among individuals within a population uh, known as intraspecific competition is a major factor that limits population size. Competition between two or more individuals or different species known as interspecific competition also affects population size and sometimes results in the local extinction of one or more competing species. Ecologists traditionally assume that competition is most important determinant of both the number of species found in a community and the size of each population. Today, ecologists recognize that competition is only one of many interacting biotic and abiotic factors that affect community structure. Competition has adverse effects on species that use limited resources. Over time, natural selection favors individuals of each species that avoid or reduce competition for environmental resources. The reduced competition among coexisting species as a result of each species niche differing from the others in one or more ways is called resource partitioning. Difference in root depth is an example of resource partitioning in plants. For example, three common annuals found in certain abundant fields are smartweed, Indian mallow, and bristly foxtail. Smartweed roots extend deep into the soil, Indian mallow roots grow to a medium depth, and bristly foxtail's roots are shallow. These differences reduces competition for the same soil resources, water and minerals, by allowing the plants to exploit different portions of the soil. Predation is the conception of one species, the prey, by another, the predator. Uh, and uh, like the predators includes both herbivores eating plants like this uh, herbivore. Predation has resulted in an evolutionary arms race, with the evolution of predator strategies, more efficient ways to catch prey, and prey strategies, better ways to escape the predator. Like this milkweed is protected by its toxic chemicals. Uh, so the leaves of this milkweed are toxic, but this predator has developed immunity for this chemical. So this is a monarch caterpillars that is can can consume this wheat. So a predator that is more efficient at catching prey exerts a strong selective force on that prey by consuming those individuals with less effective prey strategies. Over time, the prey may evolve some sort of countermeasure. In turn, the countermeasure acquired by the prey acts as a strong selective force on the predator. This independent evolution between two interacting species, as represented by predator-prey relationship, is an example of co-evolution. For example, like the students like preys and professors are like predators. So like when uh, we make a test, then students are trying to make test easier, like they share the test and find the way to answer the test easily. So without reading the textbook, then uh, uh, the predators have to make tests more complex and change tests. So students have uh, uh, to make more tests that they don't have answers to. So and then some of the students survive and some of the students will not survive. So they will be uh, dismissed from the university eventually if they don't answer the tests. So the more comprehensive test, the more is the uh, evolution. So the students uh, will try to make the tests like harder, and then only some of them will survive. Uh, so like here in this picture, the milkweed that is producing the alkaloids and cardiac glucosides, chemicals that are poisonous, and but this animal, uh, for this animal, they are not poisonous. And milkweeds are also the sources of the drugs, like for example, digoxin and digitoxin are used for the treatment of the heart diseases, and some alkaloids are also like atropine are used also for the treatment of for the uh, diagnostic purposes in the eye, for the eye diagnostic. Uh, Symbiosis is an intimate relationship or association between individuals of two or more species. The partners of a symbiotic relationship, called symbionts, may either benefit from, be unaffected by, or be harmed by the relationship. The thousands or even millions of symbiotic associations in nature are all products of co-evolution, and they may be classified into several types: uh, mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So I think we will stop here, and we will continue on next week. And thank you for your attention, and see you later.